Welcome, everybody. My name is Shannon Biggs. I'm the co-founder of Movement Rights, and we are an San Francisco Bay Area-based organization that works on Indigenous rights, rights of nature, and climate justice. And we're excited today to have a webinar, share this webinar with everyone with this exciting panelists that we have today. We're waiting for people to join the Zoom room. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sam White-Swan Perkins, to just share a little bit about the technology for those of you who are new to Zoom and how things work. Sam?
Samuel White-Swan Perkins, Ya Sapsi, Washtewa Hinkbe, Makiayo. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Shannon. Zoom has a couple of features that we'll be utilizing for today's webinar. First, the chat feature allows participants to chat with others while in a meeting or webinar. Please make sure that the chat dialog drop-down box is configured to the correct recipient before hitting send. I suggest setting it to everyone, especially when introducing yourselves, and be sure to share your pronouns and the territory you live on. If you are not indigenous to the land and do not know whose territory you live on, I will put a link to a map which will tell you.
Thank you, Sam. And I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature and the International Observatory for the Rights of Nature. And a hearty welcome to all of our speakers. We have today Casey Camp Hornick from the Ponca Nation, Frank Bibio from the Ojibwe, and we have Jenny Vega Cardenas from the International Observatory for the Rights of Nature in Canada, and also Craig Kaufman and Pamela Martin, who have just recently co-authored a book from MIT on the rights of nature as well. There's been many advancements in the rights of nature, and particularly Indigenous-led work with the rights of nature, and we're excited to share all of that with you. I would like to, it's my great pleasure to introduce Casey Camp Hornick, who's the Ponca Environmental Ambassador, and ask her to start us off in a good way with an opening prayer. Thank you.
Datia, Ponca Abdi, Manchte Ponca, Oklahoma. Judy is my true name. I'm Ponca, a woman from the occupied territory of Oklahoma. I am really feeling blessed to be here among all of you. It's a feeling that has been expanding, I guess, for the latter part of my life, that the awakening, purification of Mother Earth and Father Sky be noted and loved and cared for. And so to be here with all of you today and learning from you and hearing your voices feels like a time that, you know, in our ways, we always say you could be anywhere doing anything, but you chose this, you chose to share a moment of time with us that will help us to expand what we already know, that, you know, we are part of nature and that we need to be able to uphold those natural laws in the best way we can. So because I'm a follower of the traditional ways of the folks here, I'm gonna light a little bit of cedar and sage here and say a few words. However you feel inclined, you know, I'd like you to talk to the great mystery in your own way. And maybe somehow, some way through this sacred web of life. And I always like all the words even meshing together, that this webinar and the web of life will join us in what we're doing today. want to first ask the sacred water if she will carry our message and stand witness to this ceremony. Wakanda Hupe, Maja Hupe, Wiblaha Ehe, Wiblaha Mi Miamba De Wajinga Ni Shinga Shinga Ishagi Waujinga. Wakanda, great mystery. We ask you to look carefully at the Father, Son, the Moon, Mother, the sacred earth, the children, the elders, the sacred water, and all that is in all directions. And join us together as one thought to us, the minds that we've been provided, one intention through the sacred spirit that we live within, one path that opens towards the truth and the understanding that we as human beings are a species that are out of control and misbehaving and harming many of our relatives in many directions, and that we want to do as we were taught to do in the beginning, and that's align ourselves with the natural laws in a good way, be kind and gentle, so that we deserve to stay here as part of the sacred cycle of life. Help us through this sharing time to learn from one another, respect one another, and move forward in a way that will help the generations to come and honor the ancestors. For those who are sickly, we ask for help and health. For those who are pitiful with no homes, no food, no water, we ask that this day something changes for them. And we say thank you for all the comforts that we have, for the ability to eat, to drink, and to breathe. For all the things that we might forget, we ask your guidance. And we say thank you to all that is in all directions through these sacred ways. We chose Niwivukia, help and health, Mitakuyasan, Ede Wiwi Debadaka. Sha.
Thank you, Casey, for that powerful opening blessing. And I can feel like I'm there with you. So thank you so much. In the last few years, rights of nature, particularly those efforts that are Indigenous-led, have been really boldly leading a way forward for the protection of Mother Earth, for Indigenous rights and climate justice by reclaiming sovereignty rooted in ancestral knowledge. Movement Rights, which is an organization that is Indigenous and women-led, is also co-founded by Penny Opal Plant, Indigenous warrior, and my good friend who's unable to join us here today, but she's with us in spirit. And all of the speakers today have really exciting news to share, many of which things have occurred in the last year, which in and of itself, given the times we're in, is an extreme blessing. And we'll be looking at many questions today during this webinar, including, can the rights of the sacred Manuman rice help stop Line 3 pipeline and their efforts in moving forward in tribal court, and the meaning of the sacred rice for the people of that territory? And can tribes and non-tribal communities come together across several states along the river's paths to become guardians, protecting her right to flow and be free from fossil fuel and other toxins and poisons that we as human species are flooding our waters with, choking our waters with? and all the life therein. And what does it mean for First Nations and Canada to have recognized legal personhood for the rivers there? And what can we learn also from the sheer speed and global advancements around the world within the rights of nature movement? And I'm looking forward to hearing some of that from Pam and Craig. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Frank Bibio, who graduated from Bemidji State University in 1985 with a bachelor's degree in political science. The following year, while working at the Minnesota legislative session, Frank met Winona LaDuke, and who many of you know or certainly have heard of, and they started working on wild rice protection and labeling laws. Frank worked with Native American press, Ojibwe News, for nearly 20 years, and is a graduate from the William Mitchell School of Law. Frank's legal work today focuses on the treaty rights of tribes and members to help protect the natural systems of life for future generations. And Frank, please feel free to introduce yourself with any additional information. Frank, the question that we have for you today, please speak about the sacred Manoomin rice for the Ojibwe people, its implication and the implications of filing the first rights of nature lawsuit on Turtle Island to defend the Manoomin rice and its sacred rights. And so many Indigenous water protectors are laying their bodies on the line in Minnesota and to stop Line 3 pipeline. And how do you see representing the rights of the sacred rice in court as one part of the way to stop that deadly pipeline that is already leaking toxins into your waters before it's even completed? So many things for you to speak on, and we're so honored to have you here. Thank you, Frank. The floor is yours.
Okay, me glitch. Well, first I'll try to give you an update because I'm not exactly sure of the status of things, but Line 3, Enbridge said that they were flowing oil on October 1st, but I don't know what flowing means exactly. They may have completed their welding on the pipes, but from everybody I've talked to, the oil isn't flowing. It's stopped somewhere between Crookston and Clearbrook. And I think the reason that it stopped is because of the aquifers that are gushing out water and they're not capable of sealing them up. The DNR had given them a 30-day plan or remediation plan to fix it, and they failed to comply within that time period as of last Friday. And so the earth is still stopping Line 3 from going forward, as well as what we're trying to do. And so I think the earth knows that the water protectors are out there and watching out for everybody, and we're doing what we can along the way. So we're not stopping our fight, but we're not sure of what we can say about where they are in their progress right now. One of the things that we're concerned about is, like you're saying, there's still a couple of different kinds of leaks. The aquifer that's leaking is leaking supposedly 100,000 to 150,000 gallons of water a day, and it makes the sand like quicksand. And so my guess is that they're not able to get it stable enough to even close up. It crosses two pipelines from one of their competitors, and so I'm sure it's a concern to them as well. There's some other frac outs down by Bagley, and then some more further down by the headwaters of the Mississippi. There's been frac outs and things from their drilling and things. And so the damage continues. I know that some of our friends, Ron Turney in particular, has been doing some video drone work to show some of the things that have been happening are very concerning. And so we're looking at doing a thermal imaging flight over the pipeline to see where all the damage is, because we don't think that the DNR or the PCA is actually investigating where things are. They're just trying to make sure things are covered up or fixed if possible from the places we've made them alerted to. So that's our primary concern. Going to the litigation in tribal court has two pieces going on. We sued the DNR about must be what, 8, 10, 2 months ago at least, October 4th or August 4th. And it's a very interesting lawsuit. It's the rights of nature. It's the rights of Manoman is the lead plaintiff suing the Department of Natural Resource personnel, the commissioner, and other people. And it's interesting because the DNR, the first thing that happened to them was they were alarmed, and maybe they should be, that a reservation, that a tribal government, that a tribal court, and that Manoman itself as a plant could be suing them, and that they may have to exhaust their tribal remedies in tribal court. And so as soon as our tribal court said that they had jurisdiction over the matter, because wild rice, Manoman, is so important to us as the Ojibwe. It's our sacred and most important food. It's the food that sustains us. It's the food that brought us to Minnesota. And unfortunately, this year it wasn't very good crop because of the drought and what's going on with the drilling and the water of the DNR. And so we sued the DNR, and the DNR basically ran to federal court and said, hey, these Indians have sued us in tribal court over the rights of Manoman, and we don't like it. And we need an order from the federal court that says they can't do that. And the federal court said, you know, White Earth Band of Ojibwe, they're sovereign, and so is the court. And the DNR didn't know what to make about that. And they tried a second time with the same judge in federal court. The judge said, you got to basically go exhaust your administrative remedies. And so they're at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals now, trying to get a decision that says they don't have to come to our tribal court and stand under our law. But what we're finding out is that the rights of Manoman may very well be the solution to not only our environmental concerns and issues here in Minnesota, but it may very well work with a lot of other tribes across the United States in various places that have environmental degradation going on and different kind of permitting. And so just like any state agency, whether it's the DNR or the PCA or the EPA or the Corps of Engineers, they have laws that are particularly tailored to what they're doing. Rights of Manoman is like an agency law. And so the federal court has basically told, and will tell them more clearly, I'm sure, the DNR, that you need to exhaust your administrative remedies with the tribal court. Well, that means they're going to end up with an injunction against them soon, because that's the first thing that we're trying to do, is stop them from giving any water from DNR to Line 3. Also the dewatering. Because of that gushing water, they also have to take that water and put it someplace. And so they're taking water out of the ground at hundreds of thousands of gallons every day and putting it into other places where it wouldn't normally be discharged into. So that makes you wonder if they're not violating other kinds of permits that are going on. Everything that's happening right now seems to be a violation of nature and a violation of the wild rice and a violation of the water. And so this is critical to us at this point in time. And when you look at the rights of Manoman and the complaint that we filed, it's not just to protect the Manoman. Manoman is what calls us to protect our sacred food. We already know what to do about that. But also what's at stake in the same litigation that we have is the protection of water, because Manoman wild rice requires abundant, clean water. And that's what they took from us this year. And that's why we didn't have very much of a rice season this year. Very low water, very poor crop. And so Manoman, its natural instinct is to protect the water. And so that's also what this litigation is about our water rights, because we know that our water rights are superior to the state, and the state needs to be informed of that from the federal court. This case is also about the water protectors, because most of the water protectors, or I shouldn't say most of the water protectors, but the water protectors named in this litigation are tribal members. And tribal members, under the rights of Manoman, also have a right to protect Manoman. And so that law is also a defense law for people who have stood up to defend Manoman and protect our treaty rights. And we're trying to use that same law and that same treaty rights analysis of what our property is under federal law. Our rights to hunt, fish, and gather are called property rights under the we'll just call it white man's law. And so because it's property, like everybody else's property, like a car or a house, we should be able to invite our guests in. And if our guests are there when things happen, then they should be covered as a guest and not as a trespasser. If we have a right to be in a place, then we're not trespassing. If our rights say that we have water rights and we have a right to exercise our rights in public areas, then the state shouldn't be arresting us and charging us and making us go through their legal system, because we're not trespassing, because we have a right to be there. And so if we're not trespassing, then we can't be a nuisance, and we can't be unlawfully assembling because we're in a place we have a right to be. And if this is really property, we have a right to invite all of our friends, all of our guests, all of the other water protectors to come and help us. And they are helping defend our property, the wild rice, the natural resources, the water. And so it becomes a necessity defense. It's a necessity defense for the climate change issues. All of this stuff is important for people. And I believe that everybody who's come here to help us is really here more in a spiritual way. And I think they're protected in the First Amendment as well. And I think the state of Minnesota is going to find out that the people they're trying to prosecute probably can't be held accountable under their criminal laws because of the way they've tried to criminalize civil rights of people, and that they can't criminalize the First Amendment. And that's what's going to hang them up, because everybody here is because of their own internal feeling about protecting the earth and protecting the future. And that is a spiritual experience for people. And I think that's what's going to separate out between what happened at DAPL and all the people that were charged there, and how we've been preparing for things here. So I've probably reached my 8 or 10 minutes, but that's kind of a capsule of what's happening and where things are. And if there's questions later, I'm available.
Thank you so much, Frank. You weren't actually, you still had time left. So if there's anything else I'd like to add in the last couple of minutes. One of the things that somebody asked was DNR, which I assume is the Department of Natural Resources. Yes, you have 2 minutes.
Sure.
If you still like to continue.
I will continue, because what I've put together here with other people, I mean, I'm not by myself on any of this. I've had help with all of this, especially from the 1855 Treaty Authority. If things are set up correctly, which I believe we have at White Earth for what we're doing right now with the rights of Minoman, the Chippewa, the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, however you would like to call us, our territory is approximately 800 miles across. It goes across the Great Lakes of the United States and Canada. And so if we can use the same strategy to protect the water of the Great Lakes across Chippewa territories using our treaty rights, because our treaty rights are different than other people. The Chippewa have 44 treaties with the United States. And that means that there was a lot of negotiating going on and a lot of different deals that were made. And we have rights that are reserved that other people may not always have in writing. And that's part of what we're using right now is our treaty rights, because in 1825, when the United States was first coming into the Great Lakes and trying to figure out how to get to the metals and minerals and mine them out and so forth, the first thing they had to do was deal with the Chippewa after the War of 1812. And they wanted to make sure that they made peace with all the Indians, so that when they started land cessions in the future, they knew exactly who agreed to what land was theirs. And as long as that deal was holding, that's what worked. And so in 1826, they met with the Chippewa and assured us that title to the land hadn't changed, nor the jurisdiction. And jurisdiction is the word that we're relying on, because jurisdiction isn't an old Indian word. And to have that word in our treaty is meant to tell all the other non-Indians who would look at our treaty that we have the right to decide. And if we have the right to decide who hunts and fishes in our territory, then we also should have the right to decide how to protect our natural resources from predators like the DNR or the state of Minnesota, as much as Enbridge and Line 3. And so when I look across to the east, over at Bad River and over at line 5 and the crossing under the Mackinac River with the Michigan state and those bands, this same legal strategy may very well be the thing that allows us to sue the states and or even Enbridge if we wanted to go after those remedies that are denied us in state courts and federal courts, because we've found over the 7 or 8 years of doing every single thing we can that state laws and federal laws do not protect us or anybody else. We've had to make our own laws, and we're going to have to enforce our own laws. That's what this is really about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's an honor to have you with us and to learn from you all the work that you and so many water protectors are doing, not just to protect your territory, but for everyone downstream. And so really grateful to hear the exciting progress and work that you're doing, and we all stand with you to stop line 3. So thank you very much. Next, it is for anybody who has questions. The chat is open for just conversation and sharing information. We're sharing links about the work that all of our speakers, our panelists are doing, and we'll share those links as well as the video with everyone, so you can watch it over and over again. It takes about 2 days for us to get that going, and we will have question and answer at the end of the session with the time that we have left. So, but please don't ask your questions in the chat, because the chat moves very quickly and we can't catch them. So there's a Q&A function also at the bottom of your screen. We ask you to put your questions there, and we will get to as many of them as we can as we move forward. Next, it's my great pleasure to introduce Jenny Vega Cardenas, who is the president of the International Observatory on the Rights of Nature. She is a lawyer in Quebec, Canada, and in Colombia, with a master's degree in business law and a PhD in water resources law. And recently, she has been involved in drafting of the first joint declaration of personhood and rights for the First Nations Innu Muteheku Shipu. I'm so sorry. Please, you'll have to correct me. I've been practicing how to pronounce it, also known as the Magpie River in Canada. And she's been promoting the recognition also of the St. Lawrence River in Canada as a subject of rights. Jenny, please share your work with the First Nations Alliance for the Protection of the Rivers to become the first in Turtle Island, Canada, to recognize the legal personhood of a river. And how did this come about? And what is the significance for First Nation peoples and Canada and the people of Canada? Thank you so much. And I think you have slides, so you're welcome to share your screen from your end and let me know if you have any issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Shannon, for this beautiful presentation, and also to Mr. Frank for sharing also this experience of the white rice you are, I think, eating right now at this moment. So it was very inspiring for us, for all the whole movement, because I think we need to work together if we want to protect the planet. So we cannot work alone. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am right now is the traditional and unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. And I'm going to share with you the slide I prepared for you for my presentation. So it's going to be, I think, more clear. Just let me know if it's okay. Yes, okay, thank you. So, in fact, I'm the president of the International Observatory on the Rights of Nature. The International Observatory is a non-profit organization with a dynamic team, a large network of partners and research associates. And we promote the recognition of the rights of nature in Quebec, in Canada, and also around the world. Research and analysis are our most powerful tools through which we seek to create and promote discussion at the legislative level, working alongside lawyers and experts from all backgrounds toward a legislative change. I'm going to talk to you about the first recognition of a river with personhood and rights in Canada, so the Magpie, the Muteheku Shipu in Innu. And as you may know, it's been a beautiful collaboration between the Innu Council of Equine Chiefs and also with the Regional County Municipality of Manganese. So they have adopted twin resolutions. It means that they are very similar, but they are not exactly the same. And you can find them, in fact, in English, French, and Spanish. We have translated, and you can find it in our book we published last April 22nd, the Day of the Mother Earth. So we hope you can find, we have many information concerning what the meaning of the river for both communities who took that important step in Canada. And in order to show you how the Indigenous communities were leading this beautiful step, I'm going to quote to you some passages coming from press conference and journalists. For example, this one written by Gillian Kessler d'Amour, who quote Jean-Charles Pietachot, who is the chief of the Innu Council of Quanichit. He says, the belief that nature is a living thing that must be respected has been at the heart of the Innu people's way of life for generations. But now that idea has been applied in a new way as the Innu Council of Quanichit in February recognized the Magpie River, a 300 kilometers waterway in the Côte-Nord region of the Canadian province of Quebec, as a legal person. And I have another beautiful article coming from a very special journalist from Al Jazeera. She wrote, the designation of First in Canada aims to give the Indigenous community another tool to defend the river, known as Mutekeho Shipu in the Innu language, from potential environmental harm. The creator put us on this piece of territory called Nitassinan, which encompasses all these rivers, all these mountains, all these trees, said Pietachot, the chief of the Innu Council of Quanichit. And also he said, the Innu people always believed that you had to protect the earth, its water, its life. And we were very happy to work with those communities, with that community, with the Indigenous, the Innu community exactly. Most of them were also girls, young girls fighting for protecting this river as Shanice and also Wapukun, young Innu leaders. And because we were convinced that we need to do a paradigm shift from the anthropocentrism to the ecocentrism if we want to fight climate change and also if we want to fight the environmental crisis. So we are convinced that we need to change the status of nature in law. So we need to change from object that you can exploit and destroy to a subject of law that you should respect and honor. So in order to do this change, and you know very well, the first step is to recognize it as a person. So having the personality, and if you are concerned, you recognize this legal personality or personhood, it means that it can be holder of rights. So you can use rights of nature or also a personhood for nature because it means the same. So if you want to recognize rights, it means that the river, in this case, is not longer an object, but is a person, is a subject. So it can be holder of rights. And but some, if we are going to wonder concerning obligations, we can do the parallel with children. Children, they don't have obligations, but parents do. In this case, guardians will be the voice of the river, and they have the obligation of taking care of nature, of protecting the rights of the river or nature. It depends on how you want to write the law, the bill, but it depends also in communities. There are some communities that prefer the name of only rights of nature, but not the personality, but others prefer the name, they use the word personality because it's something that change the imagination. You see somebody there, you see like a whole, that a living person in front of you that is now a river that you need to, like a vis-a-vis that you need to protect and respect. That's what some people, some communities like also using that language. And we realize that doing this, we are also empowering communities for change because the communities can do important steps and they don't need to wait till the high level of governments decide to do a step or to recognize it, as was the beautiful case in Ecuador. That was wonderful, and now we are hoping that going to be the case in Chile and in other countries. But here was by municipal resolution, an indigenous people resolution that was also had also a beautiful impact for empowering communities. And we learned also that this step give us the opportunity to work between native knowledge, so to find better a common ground between traditional native knowledge and Western science. As you know, native science is known by being holistic, including metaphysical and spiritual issues. And Western science is known by being fragmented, using separate and distinct disciplines. So it's important to bring both perspective, native science, Western science, to work together to better protect the planet. And yes, of course, we were very pleased to work on those resolutions with many foundations, and one of the part were acknowledging the worldwide movement to recognize rivers as entities subject of rights. And we were mentioning, for example, the Ponca Nation, but also the Klamath River, the Snake River, the Atrato River, the Whanganui River. So we were putting there in order to everybody knows that it's not an isolate fact, but it's a part of a whole. And so we are very happy to be here to share this with you. And also it's important to know the context in Canada. In Canada, there's about 634 nations living here, First Nations living in Canada. And they adopted a resolution. The Assembly of First Nations adopted a resolution where concerning water, and they said water is the blood of Mother Earth. And I think it's more or less the vision of many indigenous nations through the Americas and in the world, as the Maori people, with this beautiful example of the Whanganui River, learn us to understand that we should say always, everywhere we are, that I am the river and the river is me. And also, I think it's important to highlight that we are in a context of truth and reconciliation in Canada between Indigenous peoples and the Canadian government. And it implies also to recognize the biocultural rights. And as biocultural rights have been, in some cases, the link to recognize rights of nature, as was the case in Colombia, and also by Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So the recognition of those manifestations in Canada will going to contribute with this process of reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and government. And to finalize my presentation, I want to just highlight the link between nature, climate change, and health. As you know, the last report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC Chapter 3, said that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the global climate system since pre-industrial times. So it means that the anthropocentrism, the objectivization of nature, is at the origin of climate change, because our economies are based on the destruction of nature that provokes environmental and ecological injustices. So the Rights of Nature movement is also known as a process of decolonization, and decolonization made us understand nature as a mere resource. But now we are understanding nature with an agency, as a person. So even if we are still in the Anthropocene age, we need to acknowledge that a paradigm shift is right now transforming our law systems around the world, led by Indigenous people's views. And at this moment, we are fighting in order to recognize the personhood that rights for the main bigger river in Quebec, the St. Lawrence River. And we are working with Indigenous peoples in Quebec and local communities and different levels of government in order to attain this objective. And just a lot of work, very hard. And we published just a book that we invite you to read. And you will find many chapters written in Spanish, English, and French, written directly from people that come from finally where the places where we saw that paradigm shift took place. So I invite you to consult the book, and thank you so much for listening to me, and also for being with me, and for inspiring also the work we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing the exciting work that you're doing in Canada and around the world, and for also really making the links between climate justice and Indigenous rights and the Indigenous cosmology that really is the underpinning of everything that is rights of nature. Rights of nature, of course, is a Western legal tradition, but this is really an incarnation of Indigenous cosmology through the lens of Western law. And when we, in 2018, Movement Rights took an Indigenous delegation to Aotearoa, New Zealand, to learn and share with the Maori. And you talked about I am the river and the river is me, which is speaks specifically to the to the Wanganui River, and the Wanganui iwi, who really said that they put this recognized the rights of the Wanganui River, that it was no longer considered property. It wasn't the property of the Wanganui people, the iwi, and it wasn't the property of the government. It's a river that owns itself, has its own agency, that it is the spiritual ancestor of the Wanganui people, and that as long as it was seen as property, it was a river and a people in chains. That was so powerful. We asked permission to take some water from the Wanganui River, which I traveled with me around the world many times to many different places. And finally, on Mother's Day of this year, I was with our next speaker, Casey Camp-Hornick, on her territory for a water ceremony, recognizing the rights of the rivers, the Nijude and Niskau rivers, or the Arkansas and Salt Fork rivers in their territory. And people were asked to bring waters from all of their home places to speak to the waters there. And I finally found the home for the water that I've been carrying around for the Wanganui River there, which now flows in the Arkansas and the Salt Fork River. Thank you so much, Jenny, for your work and your words. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Casey Camp-Hornick. Casey Camp-Hornick, which is her, as she says, her colonized name, prefers to be introduced as a matriarch, as a great grandmother, as a grandmother, and as a mother. But in addition to all those things, she is the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma's environmental ambassador. She's a former business council woman, and she's the traditional drum keeper for the Ponca Patata Women's Scout Dance Society. And in 2017, she led her tribe to become the first on Turtle Island to recognize the rights of nature, to protect the sacred system of life, and to protect her tribe from environmental genocide at the hands of fossil fuel industry and the politicians and agencies that empower their destruction and violate the treaties of all tribal people here on Turtle Island. She's also an award-winning actress, and you may have seen her most recently in the series Reservation Dogs. And last week I was honored to be arrested with her at the White House on Indigenous Peoples Day during the People versus Fossil Fuels Week of Action. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Casey, and please speak to, of course, whatever's in your heart, because I know you well enough to know that I can provide questions, and you're going to speak with your heart on whatever is most important, and it's always the right the right decision. But please speak to the Ponca, the rights of rivers, intertribal work that you're doing, the Padatas Women's Society's role as hereditary protectors of the waters, and the ideas of working with intertribally to protect the Arkansas and Salt Fork rivers, or Niska and Nishude. Casey, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. And Frank, I always love hearing all of your words. It's so good and inspiring to hear from you. I always learn so much, and it really makes me understand the reason that we're doing what we're doing, and how much it means to go forward with that one. And Jenny, is that how we say your name? Thank you for the work that you're doing with the rivers there. I know that they're speaking through you at this time. And that's where I feel we all are right now. For once, it feels as if humankind is beginning not just to speak and talk about human rights, which has been something that has taken up way too much space for way too long. Because as an important aspect of being part of a living earth, where we all have these incredible opportunities to be alive, simply by lieu of being part of whatever it is that whatever portion of the earth that we live on, whatever waters that she offers us, whatever that she grows in her territory and gives us to permission to eat from, whatever it is that she shares in the songs from the waters and the movement of the willow trees and the trees where you are, and you can hear the sound of the wind and what it's trying to make you feel. I think that humans are finally listening a little bit. Instead of saying we own, we see a resource instead of a source of life. We see the kind of understanding that is beginning to influence humankind around the globe. That is the way that always has been in place. And now we're giving it a name, we're giving it a form that fits within the laws of those colonizers. So they can't simply make more laws on top of the ones that we're doing, although they're trying. As I was listening to you all, I was being reminded of the reason that we went to Washington, D.C., and the reason that many of us will be going to Glasgow. And that's because we are hearing those voices, because they're still passing laws. You know, we see what Manchin is doing right now. He's trying to pass something that allows his coal company to continue to do what they do. We all need to recognize that and not name it all, because it's not necessary. But to also find ways to buy and sell the air itself. And within those sacred things that have already been spoken of, the monomen, the sacred wild rice, the sacred river that you've spoken of, and within the territories of the Ponca, that selling of air has become something that we don't recognize, even as we recognize the fights around the water and around the monomen, because the monomen is not going to continue to exist on its own, without the elements that were put in place by the great mystery. And that is air, fire, earth, and water. And the water will not exist without those same things. She has to have air. That is part of her breathing process as well. And those relatives that live within her, the same thing. And the air, conversely, has all of those things within it. It carries the pollen. It lifts the bees. It has the Thunder Nation and the sacred bits of mist inside it. So there is already a kind of beautiful symbiotic relationship that we're all a part of. And I know I've said it a lot, and it still holds true to me that we who call ourselves water protectors and land defenders are truly not just protecting nature, we are nature protecting itself. And it's really necessary for all of us to hold that very closely inside our intentions, because coming today to learn from you all and to share what little bit I can has been really important to me, to see that the intentions are beginning to shift within humankind. And this thing called rights of nature has given us that Western legal foothold to begin to examine exactly how do we do that. I think the thing that we need to be able to be aware of right now is that we have pushed the intentions of Earth for her to care for all of us to the nth degree. And now she's in a process of purification. She's in the process of allowing the wildfires to move where they need to purify. She's in the process of creating floods and rising sea levels. She's in the process of these larger storms sweeping over larger areas, earthquakes, volcanoes, and all of those things that have begun a while back and are now really moving into a quick apex. Even the flows of the jet stream, the wind, in connection with the melting caps, are beginning to move the weathers into different patterns, into different places. So the droughts are more extreme, so the floods are higher. And those are ways that humans have created because of our behavior. And so rights of nature has its place in helping to expand that. Within our territory, we still have not taken that case into court, into our tribal court. We are just close to being able to do that. We are still expanding our own knowledges of how that can be and how we can make these corporations responsible for the environmental genocide that they're in full tilt with here where I live right now, where all of the illnesses that can come with the extractive industries, extravagances are being held on our children, you know. And at the same time, we're also trying to build the awarenesses of how we can use these as protections for those sacred items themselves, those sacred beings themselves. And so that goes into the rights of the river. So it's important to me to hear exactly how you've built these stair steps to that particular way of understanding where your territory is. Ours is much different, but the water herself has the same spirit wherever she is. She's there to nurture, she's there to caretake, she's there to give life and to be life itself. In our language, that's how it's said. So we also are trying to build bridges. You know, it is our thoughts, if COVID allows us to, and many other things have to align themselves like we're trying to do, to align ourselves with the natural laws as human beings, to provide intertribal rights of nature forums through movement rights that will move us up and down these rivers into the sovereign territories of the Red Nations peoples, knowing and understanding that whatever it is that we're capable of doing to help our Mother Earth, our Father Sky, and all of our living relatives will help our neighbors, whether they're ready for it or not, the rancher farmers. There's also a portion of all of this that We have to look at each and every concept that we can. Just transitions is a way that we need to help those that are financially dependent on raping the Mother Earth through gas and oil extraction, through mining. We need to help them to understand that if they're pipeline builders, maybe they're needed right now in those cities in around Detroit and the other ones that have lead pipes that are killing them. And those skills can be transferred into that. Maybe those that are construction people can understand that renewable energies are a perfect fit for them to be able to start helping utilize our Father's Son in the manner in which he has offered his help from the beginning of time, from the beginning of the time of the great mystery. I know that there's so much more that we're going to be learning in this, so I'm going to be quiet here a little bit and learn a little bit more and look forward to interactions through the questions that you might have. My most important thing to say to you today is just what the earth is saying, just what the Father Sky is saying, and just what I tell my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Listen. Listen to those that are out there trying to help you to align yourself. Sit outdoors and hear the voices in the wind. And they come to you in the form of feelings. They don't talk this language like we do. We have to learn to listen to theirs. And usually that comes in the form of feelings. Sometimes it's pictures. But we're all in this together, this realignment of natural law with human law. It's a pleasure to be with you. Sha.
Thank you, Casey. I just want to heed that moment to listen. Movement Rights was blessed to have the opportunity to work closely with Casey, and over the last many years, she's chair of our board of directors, but we've been blessed to also be in a supportive role as she has led her tribe to recognize the rights of nature and to be the first really on Turtle Island. I think before that, any rights of nature work that was done in the United States was very legalistic and really thought of as more of a trick of the law. And so really important and powerful to recognize that this work is as much of a cultural shift, if not more, than it is a legal one. And that this work is about humans recognizing that we are not owners of the earth as the law would dictate, but as really just one of, and also one of the newest species on Mother Earth's belly, and that we are just part of this symphony of life. And so thank you, Casey, for your words. I also want to mention that Movement Rights is also a co-founder of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And Casey is also the chair of the Global Alliance's Indigenous Council, newly formed Indigenous Council. And we'll be looking forward to really elevating the voices of Indigenous peoples around the world through that forum in time to come. Our next speakers are two separate people who I know separately, but they work so much together and work together in such harmony, and have recently worked on a really important book on rights of nature that has just been released by MIT Press. Pamela Martin is the professor of politics at Coastal Carolina University in Conway, South Carolina, where she teaches courses in international relations and environmental politics. Pam was awarded the university's Distinguished Teacher Scholar and Fulbright Scholar in Ecuador, focusing on environmental governance of the Amazon. She's published 4 books and numerous articles on international relations and environmental policy. And we've known each other for a very long time, connecting over the work in Ecuador and the rights of nature and rights of Mother Earth. And her recent co-edited volume entitled Ending the Fossil Fuel Era was awarded the Best Book Award of Environmental Studies by the International Studies Association. Craig Kaufman, they'll somehow share their time together and speak together, is the assistant professor of political science and participating faculty in environmental studies and Latin American studies at the University of Oregon. He's a scholar practitioner. His research and teaching is informed by more than a decade of working with and for NGOs, for government, and has worked internationally in Ecuador, Peru, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Israel, Cyprus, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, where he spent a good deal of time, several months, living in community with tribes, with iwi there, as well as the author of several books, including co-authoring their latest book, The Politics of Rights of Nature, Strategies for Building a More Sustainable Future. And thank you, welcome both of you. Thank you for all of your contributions, and please share with us all that you know about rights of nature in the next 10 to 12 minutes.
Well, first of all, Shannon, and thank you so much. I met Shannon on such a lucky trip to San Francisco a number of years ago, and I feel fortunate to have been able to connect with her over the years, and I want to thank you for organizing this. It's very special to me and to Craig. To me, today is a celebration in many ways, because the work of Frank and Casey and Jenny is something that Craig and I have been sort of following behind and learning from for so many years. Craig and I met in 2009 and have been writing together ever since. And we are really blessed and feel honored to be in your presence today and to learn from you. Casey, it was you in 2018 that shared with me the work of the Panca and inspired me to keep going, because as you know, sometimes this work is long and arduous. And so I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank Craig, because I never get a chance to do this. We've been writing together for a really long time and speaking together. And it is true, Shannon, we do it, and he's my writing husband for sure. And so we do it in harmony, and thank you for that. And so our book covers the cases that were really at the cusp of rights of nature. And as Shannon said in the beginning, gosh, a lot has happened in a year since we turned in the manuscript. Like Jenny, all the work you have done, that's why we're very excited to hear about that. It's new and it's exciting. It bridges really all that we're talking about, the Indigenous and the Western world. It's such a new model. And so really this work is the culmination of about 6 years of field work in various places. We cover Ecuador and Bolivia. We cover India and New Zealand, as Craig's work he'll talk about. And we cover various places in the United States, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and Colombia. And so it is essentially an evolution of rights of nature. We start by talking about the ethical and moral underpinnings of rights of nature, which are completely informed by Indigenous millennia of Indigenous thought and work. And in fact, I've been working with Indigenous communities, as Shannon mentioned, for over 30 years now, and had studied and lived in Quechua communities for years in the early 90s, and was so impressed by the fact, and is now excitingly cited in Ecuadorian law, that Indigenous language does not separate items of nature like water and forest, that they are all combined. And so it's interesting that language and the belief systems that we've been learning from Now the exciting part is that it's being codified by people like Frank and Casey and Jenny and others. And so what we first found out was in 2008, we were so excited to see that the Ecuadorian constitution had included rights of nature. And by 2009, people were saying, nah, but nothing will happen because there was a movement to stop a mining project in indigenous communities in the south of the country, and it wasn't successful using rights of nature law. So people sort of gave up. But in fact, our book is the story behind these laws. It's about the laws, but it's the stories behind the laws of the struggles of the people. And what we find is despite these struggles, really by 2013, you start seeing all kinds of cases in Ecuador and then around the world of rights of nature laws coming about. And so, and they are led by indigenous communities. For example, there's the story of Jaco Perez Huartambel, who he and his community members in Moyeturo were beaten and abused for defending water. And yet, eventually, we fast forward to today, and their water is now protected via rights of nature law, infusing that law with indigenous belief. And so our book goes beyond these moral and legal arguments, and it really talks about the strategies that advocates use, the obstacles that they face, and how they're attempting to overcome these obstacles. I think Jenny's case is a really interesting example of that. But we want to make clear that it's indigenous peoples around the world that have really informed these initiatives and have driven them, been the force behind them. Of course, it's not a coincidence that the national laws that we see on rights of nature of the last decade or so are in Ecuador, Bolivia, New Zealand, and later Uganda, all inspired by indigenous communities and their relationship, humans' relationship with nature. And so while they might be an imperfect translation, these laws, they're having a profound impact now on non-indigenous societies and peoples and questioning that dominant anthropogenic paradigm about our natural world. I just want to talk about a couple of cases, and Craig is going to finish us out. I know that we have 12 minutes combined, so I want to talk about one case that two cases that I think are important. The biocultural rights that Jenny mentioned in the Rio Atrato in Colombia. This case, Craig and I had the opportunity, as did many of us, to sit down with Judge Palacios in Toledo in Quito in 2018. And Judge Palacios essentially said that the Afro and indigenous peoples of the Chocó region in Colombia, the laws that they had on the books just didn't reflect their cultural values of nature, and were in a sense killing them because the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of the Defense, the Ministry of Health, they weren't coordinating to help protect the people. And so he actually mandated a sustainable government structure, a guardianship council, to take care of the river, the Atrato River. And this created a new type of governance structure, as Jenny also mentioned, to enforce in some ways and create a common ground for people to think about their kinship with the river. I want to also talk about the Kaufman and the Sinangoa case in Ecuador. This took place, it was a decision. So as I said, Ecuador starts by not protecting areas from mining, and it ends now in 2018 and moving forward protecting indigenous territories. The Kaufman in the in an Amazonian province, talking about 79,000 acres of land on the Kaufman and Chingual rivers. And they're arguing that there is gold mining that is killing the river. They documented about 32 permits that were pending for gold mining in the river. And essentially what happened was the judges, after looking at these cases, visiting the area, seeing the way in which peoples live in harmony with their surroundings, they said, they ruled that there is an integral right of the territory and culture of Ecuadorian constitution on as an international instrument for human rights that establishes the state's obligation that there is a special relationship of indigenous peoples with their territories, not just as a source of their survival, but as an essential part of their way of life, culture, spirituality, and essence of community. And with that, they set and establish the right of not just nature, but they stop permits for mining. There is that biocultural right. I'm going to let Craig talk about New Zealand.
Yeah, and before I do that, I wanted to, I guess, just mention a couple of themes that I heard in the previous talks here today that also overlap with themes that we saw from our studies that appear in the book. Shannon had suggested that at some point we sort of give a sense of the growth of the movement. One easy way to do that is to just say, when Pam and I started this book project, I think there were 5 rights of nature laws and maybe like 3 countries or something like that. We subsequently set up a project for tracking various kinds of ecocentric laws. And so I have a database going, and I just checked it, and there are now, as of at least the ones we can find, there are at least 250 rights of nature legal provisions in 27 countries on all 5 continents. So it is a truly global movement, not just as a movement, but there is stuff happening on the ground everywhere. And I think that's not coincidence. I think it's in large part a result of the growth and the consolidation of the networks that have happened, that have been created to advance this kind of work. And so our book does a network analysis, and we show the sort of the growth of those networks and how that's gone. Another thing that I heard that I wanted to just emphasize, well, so in the book, we observe that there's no one best way, obviously, for advancing rights of nature. There are a bunch of different pathways. Obviously, each place is unique, and so activists need to find the opening where they can find the opening, right? And there are a whole bunch of pathways that you could do that. But with a lot of the Indigenous-led initiatives, I personally thought it was interesting that oftentimes Indigenous groups have been able to use treaty rights as a window of opportunity to try to insert this issue through contestation over treaty rights. And Frank mentioned that, but it's also was crucial in a number of the other cases. And I wonder if it's partly because of that we also found that there's this interaction between rights of nature and Indigenous rights that happens, that often the Indigenous-led groups, probably not coincidentally, often have used both Indigenous rights to advance rights of nature and vice versa. I assume because they see them as linked. So for example, Frank talked about how currently they're using Indigenous sovereignty, the fact that there are these Indigenous courts that have sovereignty, to strengthen rights of nature, in this case, the rights of the Manuman rights. In Ecuador and New Zealand, there's examples of kind of the opposite, where where Indigenous rights laws are relatively strong. So they're using Indigenous rights claims to strengthen rights of nature, or using rights of nature to strengthen Indigenous rights claims, I should say. And the biocultural rights are an example of that. Pam gave one example. Another, I think, really interesting example is from the Tuhoi iwi. As Shannon said, I really had the honor to be invited by Kirsty Luke, who's the CEO of the Tuhoi iwi in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so you may or may not know, they were able to get, as part of the treaty, as part of negotiations over historic treaty violations, a law was passed that they signed on to called the Tehran Act, which recognized the forest that's their traditional homeland, Tehran, as a legal person with rights. And I want to just read you a quote of what Kirsty Luke, when I asked her, like, why would you, because I think it's important to say the Tuhoi are very clear that they don't see themselves as rights of nature advocates per se, because they're uncomfortable with the rights-based framing. They prefer to frame it in terms of responsibilities. So when I asked her why they agreed to this, she said, quote, "Our reason for enabling a legal personality to apply to land was to withdraw the law, to filter out the motives, the agendas, the objectives that have been created by somebody else's law. This legal personality is a piece of law to remove human transactions, human thinking, human self-interest from the land, in order that our Indigenous beliefs, the care, the kinship, the connectedness, the want to share things with each other, to hold things in common, to be concerned to build a future made up of strong, giving people. Strong humans are the things that manage excessive lifestyles. Technology does not. And we have seen no other way than to step into somebody else's courtroom and ask that the court remove their rules in order that mine can apply. So Tehran Act is not property. An ownership situation can only ever see Mother Earth as property. And property is something that is human-made. Tehran Act is not real estate. Tehran Act is my mother. She gives me life and continues to. She is the thing that gives me enjoyment. She reminds me that I am connected to these plants and other creatures, and that I love them and that they love me. These are the things that humans are forgetting how to do. So in other words, for the Tuhoi, while they weren't, I don't think they would describe themselves as rights of nature advocates, they recognize that a rights of nature legal provisions, personality that Yenny talked about, could actually be useful for them in terms of advancing their claims for protecting Indigenous rights, particularly the right to recover their ties to their historic land. And so they used it as such, but actually the power of the law that resulted from that is not just the legal personality, it's the fact that they inserted purposely a number of Maori words. Frank talked about how they purposely put English, Western legal concepts in their law as a sign to others to make it clear. The Tuhoi did the opposite. They purposely put Maori concepts and Maori words in this Western law as a way to try to inform non-Maori people to try to stimulate sort of this less anthropocentric, more ecocentric understanding of people's relationship to the forest. And the real power then is in the guardianship arrangement. And in the book, we describe it, how basically they created a new governance system that's not based on the Department of Conservation logic of managing land for the benefit of the people, right? They flipped the logic quite purposely to say that the plan is to manage people for the benefit of the land. And we give a number of examples in the book about what that means in practice and what that looks like. But I'll just close by saying I found it personally interesting that they purposely did not close off the forest to tourists. It had been a beloved national park that got a lot of tourism. A lot of people expected them to close it off, essentially, and restrict access to non-Tuhoi. But they didn't. They kept it all going, but they changed the rules for how you have to behave inside the forest. And the purpose is, they said, is they're trying to decolonize essentially the country by modeling good behavior, which I've personally found when I first realized that that's what they were undertaking, I was blown away. And I remember asking Timothy Kruger, how long do you think that's going to take? And he very quickly and immediately said, well, colonization took 200 years, so yeah, maybe. So they have a long-term perspective, but I guess I just wanted to give you that little anecdote that's fleshed out in more detail in the book as a way of just showing how there are a number of ways that Indigenous rights and rights of nature are being interconnected, and rights of nature laws are being sort of strategically used, I think, in part also, and that they're doing that in a way that can have a real impact in changing sort of the Western paradigm among non-Indigenous peoples to hold a less anthropocentric view.
Thank you so much, Craig, and thank you to all of our speakers. We have 3 minutes for questions. So I've tried to answer a few, writing them in the chat, but hoping that I'm going to read a couple of them out and then just open the floor to all of our speakers to be able to answer them. Is there any plan to push for to recognize rights of nature at a national level? And of course, there were 2 people answered that. I did answer one person here in the United States. We're not quite there yet. We're not, it has to come from the grassroots and from the ground up and from Indigenous traditions. up, and internationally, in Ecuador, 52% of the population is indigenous, which I think means that it's filtered through the culture in a way that made it easier to pass at the national level. So every nation, every country is in a very different state in terms of how that work pushes through. But in all cases, it is, an imperative for, the indigenous culture to really, and here in the United States, certainly on Turtle Island, more and more, there's more and more opportunity for indigenous voices to be heard and to filter into the conversation. So, but anybody can address that question. I'll just ask a couple of the others and then throw it open. Does the recognition of legal personhood for a natural resource, what I would call sources of life, as opposed to a natural resource myself, but also have to define the specific people or groups that can enforce those rights? And if this designation isn't made at the outset, have you seen or do you anticipate legal fights over who claims that role? And a question for Jenny. You mentioned bringing together metaphysical and holistic native science with pragmatic Western science, much of which is based on ancient indigenous knowledge. I'm having an increasing number of conversations about the need, but it seems to me that the framework doesn't yet exist. Are there resources you would suggest for those of us steeped in Western science looking to educate ourselves? There's a question made about applying the jurisdiction granted by the 1826 treaty with the Chippewa, and for more information on that. And I think that's pretty much, there's plenty more to chew on there, and we're already over time. So I beg the forgiveness of our speakers, and we'll just hold the space open for just a few more minutes for their final words on some of these questions, and I open the floor. Don't all jump in at once. Frank? Casey?
Yeah, I think that perhaps this seems like a big thing to everyone when they're sitting at home and trying to think of what can I do? What can I do? For me, the most important thing is to say, do something today. If it means that you need to organize in your neighborhood and go to your town meetings, your city meetings, or wherever you need to go to be able to begin this discussion, whether it's at home, your relatives, that says, how do we think about the rights of nature fitting within the area that we are, and how could we look at that happening? It's happening in other municipalities. There's other places that you can look for a role model and see what can happen. And then to pay attention to who we have in office here. We've really got a bunch of idiots that we call leaders, and I don't consider them leaders. I want you to consider yourself a leader right now, wherever you are and whoever you are, because you chose to be here today. So pay attention to your inner guidance and go for it. Move forward. Have this be a groundswell that creates a national and global understanding. Number one, that we have to have a climate crisis declared now. I'm declaring it here. And then I'm going to go to the UN and declare it. Therefore it is. Make it that way.
Frank? Thank you, Casey. Frank?
Yes. What I was going to say about the rights of Menomen, when we put that law together, part of what we were looking for in terms of who could step forward, normally it's the tribe we would think of as having the power, the financial ability, and things like that. But that doesn't mean that's who does it. And We also have the 1855 Treaty Authority that initially put it together for off-reservation. And we looked at that as an action group or party also. But even if Monoman wasn't being protected by White Earth Band or by the 1855 Treaty Authority, it's still a provision, the way we put the law together, that the people have a right to stand up and defend Monoman, because we all have all of these rights ourselves. We want to work collectively and in an organized way and in a smart way. But if that isn't happening, then somebody else has to step up and step in. And that's what Casey's talking about. And I was talking to a friend of mine today, and he said that his father used to say, can't never did anything. And as long as you think you can't, you're not gonna. And that's what Casey's talking about. You have to step in, you have to step up. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do with the people that are already stepping up, and that's all the water protectors. So we've all got jobs. We all have to step up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last word from any of our speakers?
I'll say something real quick in response to the question about sort of guardianship and like legal wrangling and all that sort of thing. I guess because I can't answer it in too much detail right now, I'll just say that it matters a lot, obviously, how you structure. It's not enough just to sort of recognize the right. It matters a lot how you structure the guardianship arrangement in the laws. And so a lot of time was spent, for example, in the New Zealand laws about how that would be. And there were a lot of negotiations among various iwi about which iwi would be included as having traditional ties to the watershed in Wanganui, for example, and other places. But one of the innovations from those efforts that I think is that they created it also in a way where then the guardians have responsibility for creating what we might think in the Western world as regulatory policy for what's going to happen in that territory. And when you do that, then you're incorporating rights of nature considerations up front in the decision making, rather than kind of being reactive and just saying such and such is illegal, waiting for a violation, and then going to court to try to figure out how to deal with it and not through a lawsuit. And there's a lot of power in structuring it so that guardians are involved in the upfront decision making, what we might think of as regulatory policy. And so there are a number of networks of people in various countries that are saying, well, if it's going to be too much trouble to create a law, how about we just start lobbying and working with what we might think of executive branch bureaucrats, like city council folks and whoever has decision-making authority, to try to convince them to just start making their decisions based around these principles. So that's one of the more exciting developments in my mind. I'll leave it there.
I want to thank all of our speakers again for sharing their extensive knowledge and wisdom with us today. Movement Rights has a series of aching for more on rights of nature, and some of the questions that have been asked here that we didn't get to. We have a series of rights of nature, indigenous rights, land back movement, and global rights of nature webinars that are housed on our YouTube site, on our YouTube page. And you're welcome to also look at our website for more information. But Movement Rights, of course, is not alone. There are many partners, including everyone and the experts on this call, and many organizations that work on rights of nature from a variety of different perspectives, from a variety of and tactics, and so we encourage you to reach out and or contact Movement Rights. I'm happy to also share some of those other resources with you. We will we're here, all of us are here doing this work, and thank you so much everyone for your work. And Sam, would you unmute yourself and close us out, please?
Of course, thanks, Shannon. And thank you to everyone who attended today. Thank you to the speakers. We are grateful for your time and knowledge. A recording will be posted to our YouTube channel, and links to the video will be sent to each participant within about 48 hours. Toksha ake, wapila tanka for being here. Donalago Goodbye, everyone.
Thank
Well-
you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thank you.